Hi, welcome to this series of pincushions that we're doing. We're doing 20 different pincushions. We are up to pincushion number 6, so we're having a lot of fun. There are patterns available to purchase from the website from GourmetQuilter.com, so what we're doing is a pincushion each day for 20 days, and there'll be a download of a pattern each day according to which video we're doing each day, etc, etc. So that's a whole lot of fun. That's on GourmetQuilter.com. So if you were downloading, you'd have a pattern this time something like this, and what we're making is just a fun, cute little pincushion this time. It's just a little round, a little bit like a disc. I'm not sure why, but I just like it. It's one of those nice little things. It fits nicely in a little sewing bag. It fits nicely just near your sewing machine. There's lots of good reasons for a pincushion like this. So relatively simple to make. We need a couple of circles, but I'm suggesting that we start with squares. So I've already gone ahead and done a little bit of the work. So I'm suggesting that we have a square, and we have a square of batting as well, so that we do a little bit of quilting. If you've been watching the other ones, you'll see that I'm using some of the crushed walnut shell as my filler, and I find that having a little bit of batting there helps give that a little bit of softness, as well as helping contain some of the crushed walnut shell or whatever else that you're putting in there. And you can just use a fibre fill. There's lots of things you can use inside a pincushion. So we need a couple of squares, one for the front and one for the back, because it's the same front and back, and then it's just got this little flange on it. And a flange to me, going around in a circle, means that you've got to cut things on the bias. The bias means on the diagonal of your weave. So this is another stripe, and because that has been cut on the diagonal, it's got quite a lot of stretch in it. I'm not sure if you can see that as I pull that. That's because it's on the diagonal. If it was on the straight grain, there's very little movement with the weave of the fabric, but the diagonal allows it to move. So when we're going around curves, the bias or diagonal works really nicely, and it works particularly nicely with stripes. So why not? So what I'm suggesting we do is quilt the front and the back. So I've already done 2 pieces, but I'm going to do the other one. One is really just to show you. So my original one here, the little green one, I've just done a straight, almost parallel grid. I didn't draw it up exact or anything. And so I thought I'd try that with a variegated thread this time to look a little bit different. And then I thought it might look quite nice with a slightly irregular grid. So these lines are straight lines, but they're not all parallel. So, and I'm quite liking this one, so I thought we'd do that one this time. So relatively straightforward. I'm quite sure you can work all this out for yourself. But just to make sure, so the other thing I've done is I've drawn my circle on the pattern. There is an outline of the finished or the cut size circle, and so I've already drawn that on, so I know where I'm going to be cutting it out later. Rather than cut it out now and work with a different edge, this way we can kind of stitch to the edge and then cut it out. So really all we're doing, as I'm sure you know, is just some straight lines. So I've got a variegated thread in. It's a slightly heavier thread. Some of these decorative threads are heavier than regular sewing threads. So I've got a larger size needle in so that the eye can take it. So I'm just doing straight lines. Nothing hard about straight lines, but they're not parallel. They're not even wanting to be parallel. And there's no rhyme or reason. They're just not crossing over, but from side to side, because then when we do the ones going in the other direction, they will do the crossover thing. So it's just, all I've done is actually, I've done 5 lines in one direction and I've done 5 in the other. So I think you've got the hang of that now. So I think I'll keep going and do that, and then I'll show you how we're going to pop that little flange in. So I've finished doing the quilting. I've cut one of my circles out but not the other one yet, so I need to do that. So I've drawn my circle on, and so I'm just going to cut that out. So I have done this in 2 separate squares. Of course you could have done a rectangle and then cut 2 circles from that. It's all a matter of your personal preference. I quite like working with the smaller pieces, so I'm quite happy to do it in these little squares like this. And now we're going to start putting that little flange in place. So these are looking great. So I've got the flange here, it's on the diagonal, and just to get started, it's a little bit like putting a binding on, but not quite the same. So I'm just going to fold the corner. So this is my wrong side facing up, I'm going to fold that corner down and I'm going to press that down. And that just gives me a little starting point. And now we just need to fold that in half. So I'm just going to press so the raw edges are together. Try not to stretch it. Remember, this is on the bias, so it's a little bit stretchy at the moment. We don't want to stretch it as we do this little bit of pressing. So what we've got now is a folded over strip on the bias with the corner tucked in like that. So I'm just going to position this onto one of these circles at the moment, and I am going to just use some pins just to show you here. So because we've got that point, so when we come around we're going to be tucking the other end in. So because we've got that point, we're going to stitch that on. So what I like to do is just stitch the point on, just only for like 1/4 inch or so, just a little bit, just to hold it, and then take it out, finish off the sewing and take it out, and then start again probably about 1.5 inches further round. So what's going to happen with this as we come around, because we're wanting to keep all the raw edges together, is that this is going to sort of buckle and bubble a little bit on the inside edge, and we want it to do that. We don't want to stretch this, we just want it to sort of sit comfortably, even though that's buckling a bit, so that when that turns out there's a little bit of room for it to move, and it will stretch a little bit to form that nice little flange. So we're going to stitch just the point down, and I'm just about to do this so that you can see what I'm doing, and then I'm going to start sewing again about here, and I'm just going to be stitching around, as I said, all the way around till I get to the other end. So I'll go ahead and do that so you can see. Oh, and the other thing is, we're going to be stitching, when we put the pincushion together, we're going to be stitching with our 1/4 inch seam allowance, so we want this one to be just under 1/4 inch so that this sewing line doesn't get in the way or show when we do the next seam. So just a bit less than 1/4 inch, just do a little bit at the point here and finish it off. That's just to hold it in place really, and then come around approximately 1.5 inches, not too far because it's a whole area without stitching, but so that we've got an area here that we can tuck the other end into when we get there. So still maintaining less than 1/4 inch seam allowance, just as this is just a little holding right, and not to stretch this as we go, but to let that just bubble a little bit onto the inside. Keep those raw edges together. So just take your time. You could pin all this first if you wanted to. I like to sort of do it as I get to it. Coming round, it doesn't take so long. So we're nearly back where we started now. So what I'm going to do now is just, we've got this little area here that we can lift up and tuck this into. So I'm just going to trim this shorter than where our stitching started so that it'll fit in nicely. And continue on around and just tucking that right in so those edges are still together, and that should give us a nice little join there. So this little point is just sticking out a little bit here, and that's absolutely fine. We can trim that bit off afterwards. We mostly just want it to be nicely finished in there. And right back to where we started that stitching. So that's looking pretty good. So there's just a little bit sticking out there which we can just trim off, but we don't need to worry too much because we've still got to join it to the other piece. So that should be just sort of sitting a little bit like that, and then as we do the turnout, that's going to sit out as a nice little flange. So now we just want to join that together with the other half, the front, back, whichever piece it is. And again, just keep an eye on this little flange that it's sitting, so that when we stitch our 1/4 inch seam, because I've done less than 1/4, that everything's going to stitch all right. We don't want little pleats if we can avoid it. So just make sure it's sitting as smoothly as possible inside there. And we will need to leave a gap. So I probably wouldn't leave a gap where the join is, just because there's extra bulk in there, because we're going to have to turn it over, turn it in and stitch it by hand. So I'm just going to leave a gap, maybe 1.5 inches or so, so that we can turn it through and do that. So I'll go ahead and sew my circle with my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then show you what we're going to do with it next. So I've gone ahead and done my 1/4 inch seam. I've got a gap here for turning, and the other thing, because we're on a curve, I just would like to trim that seam a little bit, so not right up close, but just trim off some of this excess fabric that's here, but not where we've left the gap. We want to leave that so that we've got something to turn in. So when we're putting this flange on, as we've just done, I should have probably mentioned earlier, I suggest putting it onto, if you've got a different piece top and bottom, I suggest that when we've just initially putting the flange itself on, putting it onto the top piece, so that when it comes to turning it out the right way, and then when we've got to close over the little gap, that the hand sewing is on the underside of that flange. For me, that's a factor, because I'm not so good at the hand sewing, so I hide it. So I'm just going to trim, but not, as I said, that little area where the flange has gone. So now I'm ready to turn it out the right way. Oh, it's looking fun. I love this little red and white candy stripe. So just run your finger or a tool around that seam to make sure that's all sitting out as nicely as it can. And then I'm going to suggest that we just press this little area in as we do for the gap, because we're going to have to hand sew that. But you can see that that little flange is just sitting out nicely there. I'm just going to press this little bit in. So it's always a bit harder when it's on a curve to get things to sit in nicely, but I'm pretty sure we can do it. And the flange, because our seam wasn't quite to the 1/4 inch, you'll just need to press that in carefully there to make sure that that's sitting in as you would want it to. But it'll all be fine when we hand sew that in place. Look at that, that's just looking amazing. That's great. So there, it's all ready now for some filling. I think that's looking really fun. So I've got some crushed walnut shell that I'm going to use again, and it's only going to take a small amount this time. So I'll go ahead and fill it and hand sew it up so that I can show you how it looks when we get to the other end. So I'm just finishing off the little gap here. I'm nearly done. I thought you'd just like to see the end result like I do. I'm surprisingly pleased with these little pincushions, and I just now want a whole basket full just of these in all different colours. I think that would be absolutely delicious. So I'm just going to end that off. And then the one thing with the walnut shell or something like it is that you can kind of squidge it around to get it to sit where you want after you've put it in and finished everything off. So that you can make things sit nicely. So there we have a very cute little round flanged pincushion. I think they're just really cute. And that was pincushion number 6. So I will see you again with pincushion number 7.